Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Yes, we're going to talk about our live trial that we have a little bit later on in the program, but right now we have a special report about something that's happening in Georgia, and specifically what we're talking about is the governor's race between Republican Brian Kemp and Democrat Stacey Abrams. And there's been a very weird development that we need to talk about, and joining us is our expert in the matter who's been writing all about it. Joining us is Law and Crime editor Colin Kalmbacher. Colin, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Jesse. Appreciate it.
So what's going on first from the perspective? Kemp is the projected winner, but he hasn't been officially declared yet.
Exactly. So Georgia has a total of 159 counties, at least as of last night. Around 154 of those counties had not yet certified their election results. That means they either have finished counting, just haven't filed the paperwork, or, as is the case in a lot of these counties, especially the larger urban counties, they haven't finished counting the votes. And this ultimately may go to a recount, and then that recount could force a runoff, specifically if it gets Brian Kemp under 50% of the vote, because Georgia is one of the runoff states. So you have to get 50 plus 1 in Georgia, or 50 plus 0.1 at least.
Wow, so it's not a closed case. Everybody should still keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
But you wrote an excellent article up on lawandcrime.com right now. It's about there's a weird development with the voting machines. Can you explain a little bit what's going on?
So on Election Day, we did a story. Lots of other outlets did stories as well. Twitter was lit up about this. You were seeing lines that were literally stretching the entire length of schools, sometimes out of schools. These are polling locations. Majority black polling sites, just lines of black voters lined up for nearly 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, up to 4.5 hours in some cases, because these polling sites were, for some reason, unprepared for a midterm election that everyone had projected was going to have monstrous turnout for the past couple of years or so. Fast forward a couple of days, there's an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about how in at least 3 metropolitan Atlanta counties, there were hundreds of voting machines, fully functional voting machines, that were locked away in warehouses that weren't being used. And so that naturally raised some alarm bells.
Why were they locked away if they could be used?
So that is the, I don't know what the permutation of this TV show is now. $64,000 question, $128,000 question, $1 million question.
Yeah.
That's what people are trying to figure out. The counties gave an excuse to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that really didn't seem to make too much sense. Law and Crime looked into it, and we didn't really find their answer convincing. That excuse
is about a litigation, right?
Sure. So there is ongoing litigation that was started about 1.5 years, 2 years ago that has to do with basically the security of certain voting machines in Georgia. They are worried about hacking concerns. So there was a series of court orders, filings, and motions. There were joint agreements, proposals agreed to by both parties between these 3 counties, the Georgia Secretary of State's office, which is controlled by Brian Kemp, or rather was until a couple of days ago when he resigned, and the plaintiffs in the case. And so during the May April primary elections time, they made a determination, okay, this is the number of voting machines that we're going to preserve for evidence purposes. And when it comes down to the November election, we're going to come back again, and we're going to talk about this again if there's going to be any type of a substantial change. The April primary election season went off without a hitch. Nobody had any concerns. But when it came time to make those decisions again for November, no one raised any type of alarm bells whatsoever. The discussions never happened. Brian Kemp's office was silent. Those 3 offices were silent. The plaintiffs figured that everything was okay, but now the plaintiffs' attorneys are looking at this excuse and saying, wait, this litigation didn't have anything to do with keeping these functional voting machines, hundreds of functional voting machines, off the table, literally locked away in warehouses while people were forced to weather hours-long lines. Again, these are majority black precincts in the suburban metropolitan Atlanta area.
Okay, so let's just take a step back. There's a litigation going on. It's a problem with the voting machines. Someone makes the decision to take a number of voting machines that fully are functional, and not using them in this November election.
Right.
Do we have any idea who made that decision?
So the 3 counties are party to the litigation, as well as the Georgia Secretary of State's office. I was trying to run down these 4 offices all day yesterday. One of the counties said they had no comment. Another county had to confer with the staff attorney. That staff attorney told me they had no comment. I finally, actually, late last night, got an answer from one of the counties, and the answer was it was a joint decision between the 3 counties and the Secretary of State's office, but how and exactly why that decision was made, the number of machines, which polling sites in particular would be affected by, they couldn't give any detailed information. And of course, Brian Kemp's office completely silent the whole time.
So let's get this right. Brian Kemp, who's running for governor,
absolutely,
was instrumental, or not instrumental, but he was somehow involved in the decision to not have these machines be used, and clearly you're not getting the kind of response that we're looking for. But how is that okay? In other words, that seems like a strong conflict of interest. And do we hear any rumblings of what's going to happen with this? Is anybody going to file suit? Is there going to be an investigation? Because there seems to be a problem here.
Yeah, there is a problem here. And a lot of folks have been commenting on the article saying, you know, some variation of the classic phrase, there ought to be a law. Well, there was a law. It is called the Voting Rights Act. There was Section 5, pre-clearance conditions. In 2013, the Republican Supreme Court, led by John Roberts, decided to take those pre-clearance standards away, wiped them off the board. And basically what those pre-clearance standards had put into place was that certain states, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona, essentially southern and southwestern states that had had some severe problems, let's put it lightly, with racism and disenfranchisement of black voters in the past, had to either clear it with the Attorney General's office or had to file a lawsuit in the D.C. District Court before they could make any election-related decision. 2013, those are gone. This type of thing would not have happened if the Supreme Court had not made that ruling 5 years ago.
Now, from a practical point of view, these machines that are locked up, how many additional votes? So let's take it. So if you're sitting out there, you're one of these voters, and you want to vote, but you're waiting in line because there's not enough machines, and there's not enough machines because they're locked in these warehouses. Do we know if a lot of these voters just turned away, that they gave up?
We have video evidence of voters walking away from some of these long lines. We have testimonial evidence from several other voters saying hundreds of people left here, dozens of people left here. Think about it. I mean, you have a job to hold down. You can't go wait 5 hours to vote in the middle of the day, especially if your employer is not giving you the day off for election day, particularly if you are a working class person that maybe doesn't have a salaried position, that doesn't have an awful lot of job security. I mean, for better or for worse, those excuses just don't apply for a lot of people. And yeah, the motivation to vote is very strong. But if you're facing that type of obstacle, then yeah, people are going to leave, and people did leave. But and not to put too fine a point on it,
right?
This does not happen in majority white counties, majority or rural counties. I spoke to a couple of poll workers who were working in some of those type of counties. They had effectively the equivalent of 1 machine for every 120 voters throughout the day.
Wow.
And doing the math here, the equivalent in some of these suburban Atlanta counties or metropolitan Atlanta counties that are servicing either majority black or majority minority districts, which means they're diverse and white folks are in the minority somehow, or plurality, something along those lines. You would have voting machines servicing around 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, 1 machine per day. So the disparity, again, not to put too fine a point on it, but this is what people talk about when you have a discriminatory either effect or outcome, or an intent or an outcome. Here, the outcome is very clearly discriminatory. If you want to go look into Brian Kemp's heart and try to find racism, that's up to you. But the outcome of what happened here, it definitely disproportionately impacted black voters in the state of Georgia in the closest election that Georgia has had in decades.
Now, the people that are criticizing this and looking into this, they're assuming that the votes would have gone to Abrams, correct?
That's the assumption.
Do we have a sense of the voters that were waiting online, the voters that were actually turned away, left? Do we have a sense of who they were going to vote for? Because it would be very interesting to know how many more votes in one camp would there be as opposed to another.
Sure. It would be one thing to say, like, okay, are these kind of like bellwether swingy counties? Like, oh, is it 51-49, 52-48, even 55-45? Hard to do the math there. But in these three counties in particular, Fulton County, DeKalb County, and Cobb County, voters were going somewhere along the lines of 65-75% for the Democrat over the Republican.
Wow, and have we gotten any word from Abrams' office about this development?
I've reached out to them for comment, but I think they are kind of keeping their nose to the grindstone. They're focusing on the votes that actually were cast because they are raising funds right now for a recount to try to get this vote into runoff territory.
Wow, so we should all be keeping a very careful eye on Georgia. These developments are happening throughout
Keep Georgia
the country.
on your mind, yeah.
Keep Georgia on your mind, and really, I guess at the end of the day, no wonder everybody has questions about voter fraud and suppression and issues going on. So, Colin, listen, thanks so much for reporting on this. It was great, and everybody should go to lawandcrime.com to read your article.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate
Thank you
it,
very
man.
much. It was great having you on.
Always
here.
good.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So we're going to switch gears on our end, but again, you should go to Law and Crime and read about that because it's pretty interesting. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the Armando Baptista case. We will be live in that courtroom today, but a little bit later on in the afternoon. Don't worry. We have so much more to recap, including the testimony from Wendy Gembelis, the girlfriend of Muhammad Knight. We'll be right back. Colin, thank you. That was great.